If you're struggling to hit your quota while a colleague is somehow closing twice as many deals with just half the effort, you're not alone. I've been there, and it's frustrating. You can be sharp at getting in front of your leads, but if you don't understand how their brain works, every conversation will feel like a fight. Here's what most salespeople don't realize. The top performers aren't working harder, they're working smarter. What I'm about to share are 7 proven psychological techniques used by expert negotiators and elite sales trainers to guide prospects towards saying yes. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to turn any sales conversation into a strategic, controlled process that consistently ends in a win. Let's get started. The first technique comes from Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator and best-selling author of Never Split the Difference, and that is to disarm the attack. When a prospect asks, "Why should we go with you?" most reps immediately retaliate and they start defending their product by listing a bunch of benefits. They start talking about all their successful clients, and they do everything they can to try to convince the prospect why they're the best choice. That is a big mistake, because the moment you start selling, their psychological defenses go up. They're thinking, what's he going to say to pressure me into buying? But here's what Voss taught FBI agents to do when lives were on the line. Disarm the attack by acknowledging their perspective and creating a safe space where they're open to your ideas. So when they ask, "Why should we go with you?" you say, "You know what, Sally? I'd ask myself the same thing if I were in your shoes. And to be completely frank, I'm not quite sure that you should even go with us. We need to understand a little bit more about your current lead gen process and what's not currently working before I could even tell you if we're the right fit." And I personally like using this technique at the start of my sales calls with a prospect because it relieves any of the weird tension that they may have. So I'll say something like, "Hey John, the purpose of this call isn't to sell you any of my programs or services because I don't even know if I can help you yet. I'd like to learn more about your current situation of where you're at and where you want to be, and only then, if I feel confident that we can help you, we can have a discussion about that if you're open to it. And if not, I'd like to point you in the right direction either way. Does that sound fair?" And it's crazy what happens after you drop this line. Their guard is going to drop instantly. So instead of being sold to, they're now more curious, and they even start volunteering information because you're not pushing anything on them, you're actually pulling back. Remember, the person who cares the least about the outcome has the most power in any negotiation. The second psychological sales technique is a concept called identity anchoring. And I like to credit Tony Robbins because he mentions that the strongest force in human psychology is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. Now, let's unpack that. Here's what most people don't realize. We don't just have an identity, we protect it. Once someone accepts a label about themselves, they'll act in ways that prove that identity is true. And let me give you a great example. I once had a client, let's call her Sam for confidential reasons, and Sam is a very honest person. Everyone around her knows that she's always going to tell the truth no matter what, and she has integrity, she has high morals. And that's exactly what she identifies herself as. So when she found out that the company was overcharging clients on tax and they were profiting the differences, she reported it to the appropriate authorities, knowing that she could lose her job and the business could go under. Right there, she had an identity of being honest, being integral, and she made the decisions to prove that identity is true, even when things were unpleasant. So how does this relate to sales? If you're talking to a prospect and they believe that they're a decisive leader, as in that's the identity they label themselves as, then they're going to make quick decisions, they're not going to beat around the bush, and they're going to give you straight up answers. So if you can label your prospects with an identity and have them verbally accept it, then you can eliminate objections before they even happen. And this is done usually at the start of your sales calls in the discovery phase, and this would look something like this. "Brian, before we continue, I just wanted to say that I really respect that you are giving straight up answers and you're not beating around the bush like all these other VPs out there. I can tell that you're the type of leader that loves making quick decisions, and I can see that you are truly invested in solving the gaps of your business. That's something I really admire about you." And after you say that, you're going to pause. Let them soak that in, and they're going to think, "I am that type of person." So when you ask them tougher questions later, instead of giving you smokescreen objections like, "We need to think about it," or "Let me run this by my team," you've already conditioned them to believe he's a decisive leader. He's going to give you direct, honest answers because that's the identity you've anchored them to. So remember, don't just sell to who they are, sell to the identity they're trying to protect. And we can take this one step further by selling to the identity they want to become. And we'll talk more about this later by combining it with a different technique. Technique number 3 comes from Jeremy Miner, one of the top sales trainers in the world. and that is the importance of verbal pacing and tonality. Here's the problem. Most reps ask questions way too fast. It's like they're in a hurry to get through the discovery, get to the pitch, and get to the close. And this is why they're getting surface level answers with zero emotions. In most cases of a business transaction, if there's zero emotions, there's no sale. And here's what Jeremy discovered. If you ask questions way too fast, you're going to get answers just as fast. But if you slow down your verbal pacing, you're giving the prospects time to think and reflect before giving a response. And when they think deeper, they're going to feel emotions deeper. Instead of asking, so what happens if you don't solve this lead generation problem? You ask it like this. David, so tell me, what happens then if you keep losing $50K a month to all these objections then? How would your prospects view you and your ability to be a reliable trainer for them? Notice how the pauses forces them to internalize each piece of that sentence. They're not just hearing your words, they're visualizing the consequences. They're feeling the pain. Pain is one of the biggest motivators for someone to take action. And that is the difference between getting, oh, we're just gonna figure it out, versus, yeah, honestly, Kevin, I haven't been able to sleep for the past 3 weeks because of this. I need to figure this out. And from there, you can keep digging deeper and widen that gap with the pain that they have been feeling. Work on your tonality so that they can clearly see and visualize the unfortunate situation they're in. And if you've done that successfully, they'll see that they have to make a change. And that's your job as a salesperson. Technique number 4 is speak to the mammalian brain. And this comes from Chase Hughes, a leading behavior expert who's trained countless Navy SEALs and federal agents. The mammalian brain, also known as the emotional part of your brain, doesn't understand language. It only understands pictures and sensory experiences. So when you're sitting there talking about increased ROI and streamlined processes, their mammalian brain is going, what does that even mean? But here's what Chase discovered. If you want someone's mammalian brain to get it, you have to paint a picture vivid enough so that they can see it, feel it, and experience it. So instead of saying, our lead gen service will increase your qualified prospects, this is how I usually like to do it to get them optimistic and hyped up about the product. Kenny, I know this might sound a little bit weird, but I need you to close your eyes for a second and we're going to do a quick little exercise. All right, they're closed? All right, cool. Now imagine you're walking into your office Monday morning and you sit down in your nice comfy chair, and as you're logging on to your computer, the first thing you see are 12 new qualified leads sitting in Salesforce. These leads are hot leads. They already went to your website, looked at your case studies, and now they're asking for a demo this week. And as you take that first sip of that freshly brewed coffee, you can almost feel the weight lift off your shoulders. So now you're smiling from ear to ear because you're over the moon and you're thinking about which deals are you going to prioritize now. And the phone rings and your boss calls you and he's asking you, Kenny, how the hell did you finally fix this pipeline issue? And where did all these leads come from? And that's when you laugh and you tell him, yeah, honestly, I hired a lead gen agency and that's when things changed. So notice what just happened? I didn't just tell him about more leads. I made him experience what it feels like to have them. Monday morning, sitting down at the office, getting a call from his boss, congratulating him on solving this issue. And when someone can see and feel your solution working, they don't need to be convinced. They're already living in that future state. Don't just explain the outcome. Make them experience, see, and feel it happening. Psychological technique number 5 is about exposing contradictions in your prospect's thinking. And this is based on a psychological principle called cognitive dissonance. This is one of the most powerful forces that drive human behavior. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort someone feels when they hold two conflicting thoughts at the exact same time. And here's a great example of that. Let's say someone says, I want to get in shape, but they also say, I don't have time to exercise or eat healthy. That is an example of cognitive dissonance because those two thoughts creates a psychological tension and the brain hates that conflict. So the person would do one of these 4 things to resolve that cognitive dissonance. So first, the person can change one of those thoughts. So if that person can say, I don't want to get in shape. So now those thoughts are resolved. Second, he can change one of the behaviors. So let's say he makes time to exercise, meal prep, eat healthy, and now he's getting in shape. So now that cognitive dissonance is resolved. Third way to resolve this would to be add a new thought. into the mix. So the first thought is, I want to get in shape. The second thought is, I don't have time to exercise and eat healthy. But the third thought could be, but I am focused on drinking my water and making sure I'm getting enough sleep. So all those three thoughts can resolve that cognitive dissonance. And the fourth and final way to resolve that cognitive dissonance is to disregard it completely. So someone could say, I want to get in shape, but I don't have time to exercise and eat healthy, but I just don't care. And that's going to resolve that conflict. And the reason why cognitive dissonance is so powerful is because whenever it's present, we have that physical need in our bodies and in our mental states to want to resolve that conflict and inconsistency. And most of the time in B2B sales, this happens constantly. Your prospects are walking around with cognitive dissonance, but it's also ignorance. They're not aware that this is happening. So your job is to make them aware and help them identify that cognitive dissonance so that they can take action and resolve that inconsistency. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're talking to a CEO and they want to scale to 10 million in revenue this year. But later, they're going to say, oh, we're not ready to invest in lead generation right now. When you bring it up and you help them identify it, you can say something like, David, help me understand something. You mentioned you wanted to hit 10 million in revenue this year, which requires about, based on the math, 200 new customers. But you're also saying you're not ready to invest in lead generation. How exactly are you planning to find those 200 customers then without a system to generate qualified leads? Do you see the cognitive dissonance? He realizes that he can't have massive growth without investing in his growth. This is where his brain is screaming at him to resolve that inconsistency. So this dissonance will either force him to change his goal, change his way of thinking about this situation, or change his behavior to resolve the inconsistency. And here's the key. People who chose to stay in that situation or put themselves in that situation will feel this dissonance more intensely. So that means whoever made the choices and the consequences of those choices, they're going to feel the need to take action urgently on this. So in your line of questioning, when you can get them to realize that their choices and actions have got them stuck, and if they don't do anything about it, they're choosing to stay stuck, they're choosing to not grow, they're choosing to not fix this problem, the psychological pressure becomes almost unbearable for them to not do anything about it. So that's something you need to make abundantly clear to the prospect. Everything they've done, their way of thinking, all the choices they have made have led them to this point. So if they keep going down this same path, the same way of thinking, the same behaviors and actions, nothing will change. And that is a place that no business executive ever wants to be. So remember, don't just sell solutions. Expose their flawed way of thinking that is limiting their potential for growth. Psychological sales technique number 6 is lead with the negatives. And this comes from Alex Hormozi. If you don't know who he is the founder of acquisition.com, and he's helped multiple businesses make over $100 million plus every single year. He explains that most salespeople get this wrong. They start leading with positive statements like, oh, we're the best in the industry, or we have the best client results. Prospects immediately are thinking, yeah, right, that's what everybody says. But here's what Alex discovered. If you own the negatives first, it makes everything you say after dramatically more credible. And this is his simple rule. Negative statement, but positive statement. The word but acts like an amplifier for whatever comes after it. So think about it. If you do the inverse first, let's say you were prescribed a pain medication and it says, we're going to help you relieve your pain, but you might experience all these negative side effects. You're probably like, oh, whoa, maybe I don't want all those negative side effects, because all those side effects are going to be amplified. Now let's flip that. If it says you might experience a minor headache, maybe some nausea for a short duration, but you're going to be pain-free. And now you're like, oh, wow, that's not bad, because what is amplified? The positive statement. So remember, negative, but positive. And here's another great example in a B2B setting. So instead of saying, we're going to get you amazing results with our lead generation service, you say, look, David, working with us isn't going to be hands-off. You're going to need to block at least 2 hours every week for strategy calls. You're probably going to have to review and approve every email sequence we write, at least for a little while. And you're going to make yourself available for any prospecting calls that come through our campaigns. But you're going to have more qualified leads in your pipeline than you've ever had in the past 6 months. You see what happened? When you own the negatives up front, the time commitment, the work involved, everything I said instantly became more trustworthy. The prospect's guard drops because he's thinking, wow, this guy's actually being honest with me. And I trust him because, yes, I will have to do these things. Those are sacrifices that have to be made. But in the end, I get all these benefits. And Alex also mentions the more true negatives that you can list, the more believable your positive statement becomes. It's going to amplify this list of credibility even further. And yes, I can't believe this is a psychological technique, but you shouldn't be hiding anything. Just own it up front so that it's no surprise later when you're closing the deal. And finally, psychological technique number 7 is the strategic assumptive close. Now, you may have heard of the traditional assumptive close where you just assume they're going to buy, but this doesn't really work with high-level B2B decision makers. So if you say something like, how do you want to get started? Or how would you like to pay to a VP or CEO? You're going to sound like a rookie. But there's a more strategic approach that works incredibly well with high-level executives. These high-level decision makers think in systems and processes. They're not just buying your service or product, they're integrating a solution inside their business. So instead of assuming they'll buy, assume that they're already thinking strategically about implementation. And here's a quick example. Instead of saying, are you ready to move forward? You can say something like, Ben, based on everything we've discussed today, does this approach make sense for solving your lead generation challenges? Typically, this is where they would say, yes, yeah, everything makes sense. Then you can move on to, okay, great. I just want to make sure that we set this up for success. From what you told me about your current sales process, I recommend starting with your highest value prospects first, most likely your enterprise accounts, and then scale down to the mid-market once we've optimized the messaging. Does that strategic approach align with how you typically roll out new initiatives? And this is where they start thinking about their processes and either come back and say, yeah, that's exactly how we do things, or no, we just start at the lowest tier and then we scale up to enterprise or whatever. But did you notice what happened? I assumed if they were to put this solution in place, what would the next steps look like? And this puts them in a strategic planning mindset where they're thinking about how they can make it work, not whether they're going to buy. And this works so well with high-level executives because they respect that level of strategic thinking. And by assuming they're already past the buying decision, now they're focused on refining the execution. You're speaking their language. And once you've built that trust with them, you've strategized with them, you showed them how this solution can help them solve XYZ, everything makes sense, and they're on board to move forward. This is where you can go and ask. And just so I understand your internal approval process, once we finalize the strategy, would you typically present this to the board first? Or do you have authority to move forward on initiatives under a certain threshold? With B2B executives, assume they're already strategizing how to implement this successfully. And there you have it. I call these dark psychology techniques to sell anything. But here's the truth. Your prospects are struggling with real problems. They're losing revenue, missing opportunities, and watching competitors pass them by. They need a solution. And if you truly believe that you have that solution, then these shouldn't feel like manipulation tactics. You're simply helping them remove the obstacle that's keeping them stuck. So while everyone else is playing it safe with weak questions and soft closes, you're going to be the one getting results by having those uncomfortable conversations that actually get them to the root of their problems. Your prospects are counting on you.